America is back, breaking down the highlights and the lowlights of President Trump's joint address, how people felt about it, and the Grand Canyon-sized divide between the American people and the media when they talk about President Trump. All that today and more on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
America is back.
That was the theme of President Trump's first joint address to Congress. As a former Senate staffer, I love these nights. I enjoyed getting to see them up close, see the process as it plays out. TV will show everything from the president getting in his limo, the Beast, at the White House to riding down to Capitol Hill. Inside Capitol Hill, how that plays out is there's an escort committee of leaders from the House and Senate, bipartisan, who welcome them, walk them to the floor, and then a person gets up and says, "Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States," and he comes in and gives his address. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and it's an opportunity for all three branches of government to be together in a room and talk about, the state of our nation and also the plans going forward. President Trump came out positive. He really wanted to highlight the golden age of America, and I think that he navigated that really well by talking about what he's done so far. He talked about the border and the quick progress they've made in decreasing the number of crossings and beginning this massive process of deporting the most dangerous criminal illegal immigrants who've gotten into our country. We know polling shows this is an incredibly popular agenda item. He also went through his executive orders that, as we talked about last week, address really common sense issues like protecting women's sports, getting politics out of government hiring and firing processes through DEI, but also his energy agenda. Now, inflation and rising prices are one area where a lot of media coverage has talked about as a vulnerability for President Trump because prices have not dropped as quickly as people hoped. He talked about this as an opportunity for the energy agenda to step in and really play a role. And he talked about what he inherited, both how massive spending from the previous administration had driven up inflation, but also a number of crazy, really out there EV mandates, appliance mandates, things that made costs for Americans for their everyday goods a lot higher. He talked about how he's going to get rid of those things, and I think those were all a number of highlights, but he also loves to play the role of entertainer. Everything from highlighting guests in the room who have some tie to his policy agenda. For example, bringing up a steel worker so that he can talk about his manufacturing agenda. One of the most, I thought, heartwarming moments of the night was when he highlighted a 13-year-old boy named DJ, who is a cancer survivor who's had a dozen treatments for brain cancer. His dream, his entire life, has been to be a police officer.
And tonight, DJ, we're going to do you the biggest honor of them all. I am asking our new Secret Service Director, Sean Curran, to officially make you an agent of the United States Secret Service.
It was a powerful moment. I think everyone enjoyed watching the director of the Secret Service, this big, serious man, give him a hug and welcome him into the Secret Service. It was just a great moment. But President Trump also really thrives in crowd work, like a stand-up comedian going around the room saying, like, "Hey, where are you from? Did you lose a bet?" He loves doing that with people that are in the audience. And it felt like as the Democrat resistance grew, his energy also grew with it. We got a lot of reporting these last few days of Democrat leadership encouraging their members not to make themselves the story. They believe that if Trump policies are as bad as they think, then that should be the story. Let President Trump talk about his policy and they can say this is why that's bad. But House Democrats did not follow that guidance from their leadership. First, Al Green, in his mid to late 70s, waving his cane, trying to shout down the president.
Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
I don't think that is who Democrats really want to be the face of their resistance. And he was escorted out of the room to massive cheers. A number of Democrats walked out throughout the speech and posted videos online about how they didn't want to listen to that. They didn't have time for that. But in the moment, nobody knew that they had walked out in protest. It's hard to see those things. So it's really not a very effective protest. But the other really big thing that got a lot of media attention was Democrats sort of sitting and refusing to applaud through really unifying, heartwarming moments. First, when Melania Trump entered the room, normally both sides will stand and cheer. That's normally not a partisan thing to show some respect for the First Lady, because guess what? She doesn't want to be there either. It's late at night. She'd rather be doing a million other things. It's just nice to have her there. They didn't clap. They didn't stand. They just had sort of sullen looks on their faces, but also through a number of those heartwarming moments. They didn't clap when DJ was named to the Secret Service. They didn't clap when President Trump announced that they had found the terrorist responsible for the Abbey Gate attack. They didn't clap when President Trump announced the historic drop in border crossings. They didn't clap for when President Trump recognized a number of victims of terrible immigration crimes. I thought that was really unfortunate when, for example, he pointed to Lake and Riley's family, and Congress clapped and cheered to show recognition for what they've been through, and to show appreciation for their leadership as Congress has tried to pass new legislation to make sure that what happened to Lake and Riley, who was murdered brutally by a criminal illegal immigrant who had previously been deported, Democrats couldn't even stand and clap in respect or recognition for everything that family's been through. And I thought that was really unfortunate. But I think what's important to remember here is Democrats are in a tough spot. It is very hard to be the minority party when the majority and when the president is doing things that are popular. And I think that's what they're facing right now. I have worked for Republican senators when we were in the minority, and it is tough to know how to balance resistance and not stepping on your own toes, not shooting yourself in the foot. They are unable to get out of their own way. And we see their approval rating is anywhere from the low 20s to the low 30s. So, there's been a lot of discussion about what they can do to fix that. I don't think anything that they did during President Trump's speech is going to help them. But the other important thing to look at is how people felt as they watched this speech. CNN poll found 69% had a positive reaction to the speech. CBS polling found 76% approved of the speech. 63% said he spent a lot of time on issues they care about. 68% said it made them feel hopeful. 54% said proud, and only 27% said they felt worried watching it. And I think this really highlights a disconnect with what people are seeing in the media and as they talk about President Trump and from Democrats and what people are actually experiencing. We've seen polls for weeks that showed cutting government and a lot of the priorities of DOGE are quite popular. But if you turn on most TV networks, they'll talk about it like it's the end of the world. What is that discount? Where does that come from? Major Garrett on CBS last night had a really valuable point on this. He said, as I watch this, as someone who lives in Washington and reports on this, when President Trump went through the budget items that DOGE is approaching, trying to cut, the president really laid out some of the more ridiculous things in there. We can show you a second of that.
$5 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is.
But as Major Garrett watched this, his reaction was, those numbers don't add up. This isn't going to make a significant cut. But then he said, I need to step back a little bit and think how normal people hear this when they hear their tax dollars are going to these crazy items, or what they might interpret as crazy items, like a taxpayer-funded Sesame Street show in Iraq, or transgender surgeries in South America, or, opera somewhere in Eastern Europe, that isn't a good expenditure. And you have to step back and think that's what normal people are hearing and understanding as they go through this speech. And that's why there is such a disconnect between President Trump's approval and how the media talk about them. But so much of this comes back to your media diet. If you watch some of these more resistance-focused media networks, you're going to think that the house is burning down all the time. And part of our goal here at 10 Minute Drill is to give context to what's normal and what's not. What is fake outrage? What is something you should actually be concerned about? There was a hearing in the House of Representatives on air traffic control and travel technology. There's been some major incidents in these last few months that have driven a lot of eyes and ears to this discussion about air traffic controllers, technology, things like that. A gentleman named Nick Callio from Airlines for America held up a floppy disk and paper strips and said, this is what our air traffic controllers are using to try and guide Americans as they travel around the country. I think it was a really shocking moment. I don't think people realize how far behind this technology is. And I think one point that a lot of people made online was, for the last 3 or 4 years, Pete Buttigieg, the former Secretary of Transportation, was flying around in private jets and lecturing about every other topic besides transportation, while this horrible system was allowed to kind of go on under his watch. And I think that was an unfortunate thing to see. Thank you for joining us for 10 Minute Drill today. It's been a lot of fun. As always, please subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you get your fun podcasting information. Thanks again.